I think now that we're kind of like moving away from software engineers just like writing raw code into something that is more like harness engineering, where a lot of the work that we do day to day is kind of like steering the agent, kind of like enabling ourselves through like dozens of agents, be that as like a super assistant for ourselves or as like part of our software development lifecycle.
Okay, welcome Arnaud. Great to have you on Coding Chats. It'd be great to talk to you a little bit about a couple of things today. One, what you're doing with Codex, and firstly, what it's like to be a forward deployed engineer. So I've been talking to a few people about this recently, and forward deployed engineer is a role that's misunderstood. So what is a forward deployed engineer?
Hey, John, thanks for having me today. So I'll speak a little bit about forward deployed engineering and like specifically in the context of OpenAI. So I joined OpenAI a couple of years ago. Back then, the company was primarily selling and supporting our API business for startups. And then we eventually like moved into enterprises and supporting some of the larger companies in the world. As part of this, we created the forward deployed engineering team with two goals. The first one is learning. Frankly, what we realize is this technology is very new. It's also very complex to many people, and integrating AI goes beyond just integrating an API into a system. It's actually an end-to-end process, and you have to understand the problems that the company is facing. You have to translate that into a set of, I'll call it like core solutioning, essentially, which, Codex is a big part of right now. And we're kind of like moving everything onto Codex as like a first primitive. But there's also a larger effort around kind of like rethinking the processes in the world of AI. And so forward deployed engineering is essentially the end-to-end process of supporting our customer, generating value. And so for us, it's been on one side, learning about our customer, what they need, how we can best support them through doing the work ourselves. And second is kind of like bringing a differentiated offering to this customer when it comes to, potentially doing model customization, in some cases doing like custom effort and custom like product building for them, or kind of like be a thought partner in this process. And so we've had tons of successes doing this. We're expanding our team a lot right now. We've grown from 2 people into 85 today. And, 2026 is also going to be a big year for the OpenAI FDE team. So this is a very, I think, core motion for OpenAI in supporting its enterprise customers.
That's fantastic growth. So you talked a little bit about like learning and getting in your teams. I sort of did a similar role for AI startup a few years ago, doing AI for network optimization with telco networks. And it was always insightful there to see we were talking about AI and how our AI could improve the networks. And then you go and see a customer and they say, that's great, but we just love to see what our network looked like. Our network's in a bunch of spreadsheets or it's in some data somewhere. So how much of what you're doing as forward deployed engineers is helping the customer kind of unravel their situation and figure out how do we even get to the point where we can use this tool?
Definitely. No, I think this is spot on, John. And a lot of the work that we do isn't super sexy. It's really about like solving the problem. And through this, there usually is a bunch of things around like data integration, figuring out which data source makes sense, kind of like getting all of this data into a shape that is ready to be consumed by agents that we create on top of Codex. I think now that we're kind of like moving away from software engineers just like writing raw code into something that is more like harness engineering, where a lot of the work that we do day to day is kind of like steering the agent, kind of like enabling ourselves through like dozens of agents, be that as like a super assistant for ourselves or as like part of our software development lifecycle. A lot of this now is kind of like making sure that you have the context ready for this agent. And so to your point, a lot of the work is around getting the data ready, getting it in the right place and the right shape for the agent to consume. But I'll say that also there is a lot of work that we do to support our customers into understanding where they should invest their efforts. I think in many cases, when you speak about some of those complex tasks. I can give you an example around semiconductor, for instance. Like we've been working very deeply in chip design and semiconductor as an industry to support one of our like large partner in this field. And frankly, like if you look at like all of the tasks that, a software engineer does in a chip design company, there's actually many silos of effort that you have to do. And so knowing which one you want to prioritize, where do you focus, is actually first the big question that they have to ask. And so one of the things that we've done, for instance, is like legacy code migration. That is a very heavy effort for many of these enterprises. Like think about large C++ code base. You want to migrate that, it's both like API migration, you have like, code and scripts migration. All of that is a gigantic effort. And so understanding where you get started in this, what part of the code base, how do I understand the code base? Which script do I move first? How do I test that this works? Is actually part of the expertise that we bring to these customers. And also we actually do the work alongside them. And I think that is kind of like a transformative thing for them, because giving advice in the world of AI at the speed that this is going is always a hard thing, because when you're on the other side, you never know how to take this advice. You never know how to actually go and operate. And so being in the trenches with our customer is, I think, part of the recipe for success of this motion here.
Yeah, I think that's always been so important in this environment, whether you're now an FDE or whether you're a solution architect or technical consultant, as the role used to be called. It's that partnership, isn't it, between you're bringing the expertise in how you use your product, so in your case, Codex and OpenAI APIs, they're bringing their domain expertise, and you're trying to mix that and collaborate together as a team. So talked a little bit about the data there. So, you're delivering Codex at the moment. So how can a team work with you and make sure that they get the best use out of it? What are the kind of things they can do to set a project up for success?
Yes, I think there's two things. First, it's about understanding where you want to focus. And second, it's about kind of like encoding your expertise, your knowledge, your data into the context. And so if we just like look at what it takes today to build AI solutions, it's about like creating the instruction layer. It's about like having the right harness for Codex to operate. It's about the scaffolding, this architecture of your agent, connecting your MCPs, getting the structure in your repo right. It's about the skills, like encoding some of these inner loops and potentially sub-agents into a repeatable pattern. And it's about creating those feedback items, feedback loops. Basically, if you think about, 2 years ago, we were in a world where we had like a light, assistant, doing like completion of your code script. We moved in a world where you may have like, a few lines of code being auto-scripted by ChatGPT, in a world where now like most of the stuff that we do is fully automated. But I think this requires a lot of engineering effort to be able to set Codex the right way. And I'll give you one good example. Someone in my team recently worked to like automate the full agent creation process, which was a task that I think we were uniquely good at a year ago. Like this was, I think, the differentiated factor that, AI experts were bringing. Now, if you set up the evals, which are essentially like the matrix measurements of your agents, and then you give all of the context to Codex, you can leave Codex overnight. And this is, what John and my team did. And then he woke up the next day and he had like, probably the best agent tune and context setup that he could have. And so, you think of this as like not just helping you write code, but even help like improve itself and its entire like, loop of agentic experience. And I think this is where we are going as an industry. And frankly, Codex, like especially if you think about 5.4 and the latest release that we've done, has been amazing at this. Like, we're moving away from just sort of like point and file creation into something that's uniquely good at long-running tasks if you provide the right structure and the right context. And I think this is more and more where we're going as a company. And frankly, for us as a team, this has been kind of like very exciting as an experience in enabling ourselves to be more efficient.
Yeah, and I guess you've got a very unique experience with the models, because a lot of us are using things like Codex to do our coding and as a coding agent. But you're facing it from both sides. You're presumably using Codex as a coding agent in how your team delivers stuff, but then you're then using the models to deliver services to other people. So how is using Codex impacting your team, and how is it impacting on how you deliver to your customers?
Yes. I mean, to your point, we are the first users of Codex, and we like to think it that way. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can optimize our own agentic setup. Like, I think to us, Codex is a tool. So I don't think there is anyone in the team right now that writes, more than a few lines of code every day. Like everything is sort of like Codex generated and reviewed. And I think part of what I just mentioned around how you make sure that your software development lifecycle is correctly set up is key here. You want to have your policies right. You want to have your agent set up correctly. You also want to think about how you use Codex as like challenging itself. And so you can have things like, within your development lifecycle, you can have like sub-agents specifically tuned to writing tests. I think, as an engineer, I think you'll relate with the fact that everybody hates writing tests. And so when you have a sub-agent that sort of like automatically writes those tests for you, this is a great experience. And you can get the test to like, challenge your main agent writing. So on one side, we use Codex as a way to deliver software for our customers. But on the other side, we've kind of like shifted completely into using Codex as the main primitive. My team focuses primarily on building custom solutions for our partners and our customers. They come to us with their big problems, and we think about how AI can help and sort of like go all the way into implementing that within their environment. And part of this is, a year ago, we were using the models like GPT-4o, for instance, as kind of like writing code and, solving part of those challenges. I was looking recently at one of the architecture diagram of a project that we did around intelligent triage and debug for a semiconductor customer. And it was very complex because like we had like multiple layers of sub-agent. We had to like work around the model constraint and essentially like create sub parts for every failures of the model, like checks and then like specific loops. And we shifted this away a few weeks ago to run on Codex. And if you see the before and after of the architecture diagram, it's very telling. Like Codex now is the primitive for all of our delivery in the field, and we build on top of Codex. And I think this is where having a pattern and a structure for how we think about creating Codex-backed application and how we use and leverage Codex as the sole, core primitive of all of these applications on which we hook up the context, on which we connect the MCP servers, and on which we run our evals to make sure that we can guardrail this entire experience. I think this is where we're going, and we've seen honestly tons of success on our own metrics and customer applications in the field.
Very cool. So I must be one of the few weird software engineers you meet then, because I actually like writing tests. I'm very much a proponent of test-driven development and genuinely like my tests first. And I approach that from the point of view that when I'm writing the test, I'm doing my thinking, I'm working out what is the precise behavior I want to hear, and I'm specifying that. And in many ways, that to me is the bit I like, and then hand over to the agent to go and implement it and figure out from there. But you mentioned a couple of things in the workflows there, and a few things stood out to me like eval. So if somebody's coming into this and thinking, like, I'm going to use these tools, want to improve our engineering workflow, what are the things that you think maybe the top one or two mistakes that you should avoid in your engineering workflow, and maybe the best thing that you should be incorporating to leverage Codex best in a workflow?
Yes, for sure. And I think everybody is going through this journey right now, John. If you look at like Codex usage is up, 5x over the past 3 months. I think, even myself as a user, I've completely changed the way I use Codex over the past like 3-4 months. I think 2026 to me is like a different year than 2025 was for our own tools. So I think when I think about, how we advise the people who join the team to operate with Codex, I think there's a few things. First one, you want to be very explicit in how you set up the tool. Like Codex isn't going to solve, you not thinking deeply about your problem or not giving it deep understanding. Test-driven development is definitely the way that you want to be thinking about this. You want to be very explicit about the edge cases. You want to be knowing where you're going. And so if you do a one-line prompt, Codex is not going to solve for this. Codex needs deep guardrailing. It needs understanding of where you want to go in details. And so I think my advice would be like, use Codex to help you write your own Codex prompts. You can do this as like a multi-step process. You can even have, a Codex kind of like sub-agent kind of like helping you define some of your goals. The second is, I think we're moving away from just kind of like one-off, I write a query, I get an output, to more of this hardness engineering work that I was mentioning. We published recently an open source repo called Symfony, which has been based on the work that some of our engineers have done internally at OpenAI. I think it was the first effort that we did where we tried to like remove like coding, like writing from humans at OpenAI, and we moved into a world where we optimize linear cards, and everything was kind of like run by Codex. Then our engineers were reviewing the PRs and kind of like making comment, and all of this was orchestrated through a linear board. And we've kind of like published this open source. Everybody can go and look at it and re-implement it for their own workflows. But I think this is frankly like, by doing this, you realize that behind the scenes, to get Codex to orchestrate and automate some of your tasks, you need to be thinking deeply about what is your infrastructure, what is your repo architecture, how do you run and write code? Like it's almost like you have to be more intentional about enforcing these patterns that you were doing, when you were writing code yourself, because maybe everything was in your head, but it's probably not in Codex's context unless you're explicit about this. And so we publish a lot of documentation and information on this. If you go to like developer.openai.com, there's tons of things that we have there to help you set yourself up and kind of like understand what is the starter kit that I need in order to start using Codex in my own repo for my own workflow and kind of like building AI-powered applications.
So as you're saying that, I'm kind of hearing myself in the past. So many times I've come into a company as a new joiner or as a consultant and said, right, day one, where's this? How do I do this? How do I build? How do I deploy? Where's the onboarding guide? And 99% of the time, there isn't one. So one of the first things I typically end up doing is building that onboarding guide and saying, this will make it easier for everyone that joins. It make it easier for everyone that maybe has forgotten some of these details because they've not worked in this bit. And I see those as being incredibly useful as we move into using AI because it's all the same information. So it brings me back to kind of that Dora point that was made, I think, last year in their report, that AI amplifies what we do, doesn't it? If we present those good engineering practices, we can leverage it so much better and we can get so much more out of it. If we don't have those things in place, we're kind of using a tool and hoping it's going to do magic for us when we haven't said what we want.
Exactly. And if you look internally at OpenAI, the number of PRs raised, which I think is a loose proxy for, productivity of developers, has increased like exponentially over the past few months. And I think this is where, I think the technology isn't linear. Like going from GPT 4.0 to GPT 5.4 was maybe a year, of work. On paper, it looked like, maybe a sense of increase on the state-of-the-art benchmark. And I think both models at their own time were state-of-the-art. But you can tell that like a largely or, marginally more intelligent model, especially on coding, will increase multiple fold the value that you get as a software engineer from getting some of the inputs. And I think we're excited also about what's coming because software engineering and long-running tasks are some of the kind of like most impactful things that we have and that we're working on. Just a few weeks ago, Cursor built an entire browser within a week of just using Codex and letting it think for a week. And those are the things that are going to be more and more available for enterprises as they think about implementing AI into some very complex workflow. Like one thing that we did is working with an energy company on running physical simulation models. And those are things that, frankly, when I sat down with these people, they have 30 years of experience. And they asked me whether, we would be using the same models that their kids get into ChatGPT. Like you can tell that there is some skepticism in AI in part of the world. And, a few months down the line, when you see the value, when they realize that the model understands physical simulation very well and it can help them, like this is where people realize the tangible value of this technology within their environment, with their context, in their work.
Yeah, I think the browser one is an interesting example. The challenge I see with that is a lot of us, like in an enterprise environment, a browser is fairly well defined. We've got a good set of tests for them. Normally you get things that are far more, mucky or jagged, underspecified. So I'm a little bit uncertain how valuable the long-term thinking is and the reasoning and tackling bigger projects because can we as humans deliver those requirements? Can we get what we need from our stakeholders in a bigger, and that now is what I see in a lot of ways as a bottleneck for adopting this and really using that long range functionality. Is can I penetrate stakeholder down to the requirements? Can I get them to articulate these clearly enough, and then I can transcribe them before I can get to that stage? So again, it's back to kind of working with the customers really. How are you helping people tackle that?
This is a very good question, John. I think it speaks for two things. One is it takes time to realize value from the technology. Codex is very fast. You can get results, tomorrow you can do an amazing proof of concept. But in the enterprise world, changing enterprise processes, thinking about the future takes a lot of time. And there's great reasons for this. Those companies have been built over decades. The technology goes very fast. In 2 years, the amount of changes that many of these enterprises have done, like I was recently discussing with our team that works with Amgen, for instance, who's like a very large pharmaceutical company. The thinking that Amgen puts into life science discoveries and kind of like clinical trial research is amazing. This is a large company that puts AI into practice and, see real and tangible value. I think still it takes time to kind of like structure your data, organize your processes, creates the compliance layer in the enterprise world that is needed in order to get these long running tasks. But equally, I think part of what the tool can bring is ease up the access. And so that means both kind of like connecting directly to some of your data sources. This is from connectors. This is sort of like creating this context layer that you're going to be able to consume in these long running tasks. But it's also frankly about creating other system so that you don't always have to kind of like authenticate to API and sort of like create this connector one after the other. 5.4 is the first model that has native computer use agent. I think a lot of the surfaces that you and I interact with every day is like a browser. And my boss asks me something, I might go and check in my email, then I might go into something else. And, it takes multiple systems for me to come up with an answer. And I think some of these systems might never get connected because maybe they don't have API access, or maybe they're on some kind of like third party, non-accessible system. And so this is where kind of like having different ways of interactions for the model will also speed up the adoption curve and help enterprises see the value more quickly in their journey.
So following on from that, let's say I'm an engineer sat in an enterprise, OpenAI coming in, we're going to integrate your models. What can I do as an engineer in the enterprise to set the project up for success? Because there was a report not long ago saying that 95% of enterprise AI adoption fails. So what could I do as an engineer in enterprise to create the right environments that when you and your team come in, we build a successful project?
Great. I would... I love this question. I've been thinking about this very deeply because we've also been iterating about this ourselves. How do we set up our customers for success? And I think it comes down to three main things. The first one is, have you identified the right problem and the right place where you want to bring in the technology? Because in many cases, you end up asking a question and people talk about the happy path, but the unhappy path is where it falls short of application. So understanding where you want to solve the problem and going and sitting down with the people that have this problem day to day and seeing how they solve it in practice. The second is getting your data in order. I think one good thing is this technology is much better at consuming lower level of data than like traditional machine learning was 10 years ago. And so there's maybe less work to do in kind of like cleaning your data, but you still need some kind of access to your data, be that through the computer using agent or through the connectors that I mentioned. And the last one is really think about how are you going to consume this? Because just building the software is the first part of this equation, but there's a lot of value that flows downstream if you're able to do the change management. I think this is kind of like a loaded term, but frankly, what we mean here is how are you going to consume this? How are you people going to interact with it? What does that mean for the process that is there? And I think if you think about these three things, you don't need to be perfect the first time. I think some people try to overthink the process and get it to perfection. I think with any technology transformation, we learn every day. Our customers learn every day. And so it's more important to be on the journey test out, like get Codex in the hands of everyone. I think it's amazing what people can build. And, you build something, it's not perfect, but then you learn. And the next time you do it, it's better. I think a lot of our own recipe and, many of the things that I've mentioned to you today are kind of like the patterns of our own failures and learning from them and kind of like tweaking and like re-updating. And so I see this as more of a journey than kind of like an exact point that you're going to and, while you're finished and solved in a way.
Yeah, so like many change programs, it's a case of start, learn as you go along, be prepared to iterate, be prepared to evolve and adapt. So as you're going through that learning journey then, how much of a time as an FDE in a customer are you going to spend coding versus doing stakeholder management versus maybe doing that problem discovery and refinement versus setting up config? What does the whole engagement look like for an engineer?
It will change from customer to customer. I think roughly, I'd say we would spend like the first few weeks, it will take 2 to 4 weeks to understand the context. We spend a lot of time in industries where you have, very little expertise unless you spend a decade there. So it's really about, getting deep. Like when you talk about energy, when you talk about semiconductors, life sciences, these are places where people do their entire career working on specific items. And, we want to be humble. We want to understand from them so that we can start pattern matching across industries. What are the things that we've seen successful elsewhere that we could reapply? Because outside of the verbs and the nouns that they use, a lot of this is the same underneath. So few weeks will be primarily sort of like understanding. What we like to do is sort of like build a first, I'll call it proof of concept, even if I hate this term, but really just like build something to show the value. Like we're not here to create slides. We're not here to give ideas. We are here to like show that like this can work. And so I think there is really this moment where when you get a tool, even if imperfect, in the hands of the user, and they start seeing the value, they start seeing what they've been kind of like, explaining to you. This unlocks a lot of the long-term goodwill that you can build with them. And, after this initial scoping period, we would get into kind of like joint building phase. So this is where we work hand in hand with our customers, actually building those solutions with them. Will be usually within their systems. We're kind of like encoding evals. And so that is a work where I think you can broadly call this coding for 60 to 80%. So I think the day-to-day work of an engineer at OpenAI has changed a lot. And so I wouldn't say that we code as much as like we kind of like orchestrate, we kind of like review, we think about, how we need to structure things. There's definitely a very deep level of software engineering that you need, but it's maybe less about coding each line of code that we were doing a few weeks ago. A few months ago, frankly. And then there is a little bit of, towards the end of the project, this is slightly more of handing over or like changing the processes. And this is where we also have other teams that, kind of like supplement us as needed there. But frankly, it's really about kind of like transforming that. And then we partner deeply with our research team. And so in cases in some of these industry where we identify that the model and Codex specifically doesn't work perfectly. One example is, in semiconductors, they use coding languages like RTL and Verilog, which are very low level coding languages. The models haven't seen them as much or hadn't seen them as much. And so part of our work is also partner deeply with our research team to kind of like identify failures in the model and ensure that the next generation of models then kind of like patches those failures so that our customers can get the benefits of improved model qualities in their use cases, in their specific industries.
Yeah, it's a blast from the past. I haven't seen dialogue since university in the late 1990s. Yeah, I can't imagine there's much training data around for that and much scope for that in the models. It's quite niche, isn't it? Wow, that's so interesting. So as you're feeding this back into the models and improving it, some of the lessons, like maybe the skills, how you use sub-agents, is this coming back into the wider ecosystem? Is any of this being fed into an open ecosystem that, say, the rest of us can leverage?
Yes, we do a lot of this, publicly. I think I mentioned Symfony earlier, but I want to go back maybe like 2 steps further, which is our team, so the forward deployed engineering team, published open source the first multi-agent orchestration framework, I think now probably a couple of years ago, which we called Swarm, which has eventually become like Agent SDK, which is our sort of like joint, sort of like official agent orchestration framework. Like we've been on this journey of open source and publishing things back into the industry for a long time. A lot of our product development roadmap is also based on the real world learnings that we do. So things like sub-agent, a lot of the skills and the structure is actually baked from what we've realized doing this. Also, like Codex, the harness, is open source today. So I think there is this culture of giving back to the community, especially at a time where we are frankly learning so much, all of us. And you can see this, like people use Codex more and more. It has become something of a habit, not just for developers, but actually for people that have this kind of like hacker mindset and want to just like test out, create something, automate part of their job. And so, we see this in the growth. Like we now have like 3 million users on Codex every week. And this is just trending up. Like, we're growing almost 70% month over month. I think we're going to see a ton more people using this. And so our giving back to the community also fuels this growth downstream.
So I'm going to, a bit of curiosity here. When you use models yourself, are you an in-IDE person or are you a command line person?
I was a big command line person until recently, and then I started using our Codex app, which has kind of like nice tools for managing sub-agent, which for me has been really a killer feature, because I used to run multiple different like terminal and have like each of my Codex like work stream just like run, and then once one would finish, I would start another one and kind of like check the previous one. I think now with like sub-agent and ability to run them are kind of like parallel streams. I have like specific sub-agent, like I have a sub-agent that write tests as I mentioned, and that is the kind of thing where like I just throw everything and like send it all together. Someone was also suggesting to me to just have like multiple sub-agents run different optimization for my agents. And so, you test which one you get the best result with and you keep that one. So all of these, there's kind of like native features within the app. And so I think it's not that long, maybe like 3-4 weeks ago, where, someone convinced me to try and use the Codex app. And I don't think I'm going back to my iTerm to terminal window, unfortunately.
I find that really interesting the way it's changed our workflows, because I've gone the other way. As a diehard IDE user since Visual Studio C++6, Visual Studio 6 and Visual C++6, so quite a long time ago. I was a big fan of IDEs. I've been with them for a long time. I have moved more recently to using the CLI a lot more and really enjoying using it through the CLI. And now I almost use the ED basically as a markdown editor and writing my docs and the test cases that I want, and then dumping it into the CLI and letting that run all my sub-agents. So I find it's quite interesting the way that people have changed their workflows and the way that it's been impacted by that. There's been a lot of discussion recently about how widely AI is being adopted in the software development lifecycle. Claims from anywhere from 90% plus of developers using AI to only about 20% of us are using agentic frameworks. As you kind of hinted at before, a lot of enterprises are quite slow in adoption. So I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle ground, and there's still a lot of people that could come on and leverage these tools. So what would you say is that the best thing that they can do in bringing agentic coding, whether it's through the Codex IDE or through the command line tool, what are the best things that they can do to bring that into their software development lifecycle and get the kind of initial benefit, start to see how powerful it is?
Yes. I mean, going back to our discussion about, what it takes today to build using this, I think a lot of this is about, as a developer, think about your own processes as almost like you're the customer. What do you need to change? Where do you start automating some of your tasks? And so I think, developer lives are very different if you live in a large organization or in a small startup. If you're, customer facing, if you're an infra dev, if you're a front end dev, there will be different experiences. And so I can't speak for this is, just the process. The thing I would start looking at is where do you spend most of your time and you like it the least, and what do you, where do you get your value? To me, it's test. I get that like you're more of a test person, John, and I respect that. I think some people, love thinking about like complex backend architecture and system design. Some people hate writing like API specs. It's really about like where do you start? I think some of the things that have worked super well for us is embed Codex at the core of your software development lifecycle by getting, within your CI/CD, for instance, you can get some like automated PR check for things that, you care about in your own company. The other thing I would say, frankly, is start building up some of your own context for how you want, as a software engineer or as a company, your code to be written. This is a long journey. So setting up like what is the agent.md, what are the policies that as a company or as a team or as a developer you want to have. I think those are the things where it takes a while to get them perfect. But starting today, just testing out, seeing the limits on your own workflow, and then trying to hack this into something that works is, to me, the best way to get familiar with the tools. And then once you get this familiarity, it will become obvious. It's you really become rate limited by your imagination on how much you can do with that.
Yeah, that's a great approach. And so when you're using Codex within your team, are you kind of building out individual skills, or are you having kind of team-wide or maybe project-specific skills and sub-agents? How much standardization is there versus how much exploring on your own? And how do you balance that? Because we need that sort of exploring on your own to figure out where things are going and how they're changing. But yeah, standards are useful too.
Yeah, for sure. Generally, at OpenAI, over the past 3-6 months, things have completely changed. Like you can tell that there's been a sort of like structural difference in how people like leverage AI into their daily task. This is true for our sales team. This is true for our finance team. But I think specifically within software engineering, like I think we've completely changed the way people work. 5.4, I'll say this, like 5.4 was really a game changer. I think 5.3 Codex and 5.4 kind of like be the first two models that have reached a level of trust from our own developer community, which has a high bar in terms of trust and quality of code that you need. So when we think about standardization versus customization at the edge, I don't have a perfect answer. Frankly, we try to do both. So both at OpenAI and within the DFD team, we have a core repository where we have skills, shared. There's like great front-end skills that we've created. There's like specific skills for some of our own tools. So you can just like download skills that some people have created and use them within your environment. The other thing that we've done is we've created like scaffoldings of repos that you can just use to bootstrap new projects. So you've got everything that you need when it comes to like orchestration. You've got your agent.md. You potentially have different levels of Codex skills within the same repo. So in cases where, you need to have like sub experiments or sub experiences within a repo at different level of the tree, that's also an option. So all of these, we have kind of like scaffolding. But then when it comes to each customer, each project implementation, you will need to customize this. And I think where you get the most value out of AI is when like AI can, automate or improve a very high level of customization for any specific customer or need. Like, when we talked about this Amgen customer earlier, what you need to set up, success for Amgen in something like a, clinical trial document authoring use case will require a lot of different items than when we work with BBVA on something like, credit management. It's different sources, it's different approaches to repo structure, code writing. And so all of this is defined within kind of like the configuration of the repo. So you want to make sure that you start sort of like building this as a primitive within your repo, and also benefit from the scaled learning of your organization for things that you can pull and standardize.
You reminded me why I so much enjoyed doing this kind of role and going to visit different customers, because I like learning new things, and it was great, going one customer and learning that they're using this technology and working in this domain, and then you go to the next customer a few weeks later, and it's a completely different technology stack and domain potentially. So you also mentioned that 5.3 and 5.4 have been evolutionary steps forward. So as AI keeps improving, where do you see that kind of changing the role of yourself and your team in the future? As it gets better and it gets better at maybe helping people customize itself, does that change the FDE role?
I think the FDE role is magnified by improved AI capabilities. Part of our role is kind of like shepherding customers and our own internal team at cases on where does the customer needs solve and where do we not have tools or models to support that today. Like, I think we are a team that sort of like fixes the gap. And I think frankly, it will take some time for there to like not be any gaps anywhere. What I can see is as a team, leveraging our own tools, we've been able to move away from requiring like large teams of, 3-4 people on a project for 12 months into something where we deliver some value within, just weeks of one person. And so that is something where like we've been able to do much more. But at the end of the day, I think the core primitives of what makes a great FDE is things like high agency, high curiosity, great system design and understanding of like technical concept. And all of that is just improved by having a great technology that you can leverage to do a lot of the work and, support you in doing that. So I think the FDE team to me is a role that is here to stay. And we're very excited to expand our team at OpenAI. I invite anybody who's listening to apply on our website. And then we're going to like expand those capabilities by leveraging further the tools. Like the more tooling that we have, and OpenAI is investing heavily on this. We just announced Frontier, which is like our core enterprise platform. All of that is going to be connected into Codex, and so this will basically create more and more tooling to speed up the work that FDE can do, so that we can essentially support more customers and see new problems in the world.
So very much you see the role as kind of evolving and, should we say, working at the enterprise stack in a way. So maybe you're dealing with a coding problem now and it'll step up to how do we build this system? How do we manage these data flows? And then maybe it'll step up to how do we deal with this value stream in the enterprise? Yeah, I mean, that makes sense for evolving as we better understand what we do, as organizations become better prepared and better have that data and have a better understanding of where they can leverage this and the kind of projects that are now feasible. So you mentioned that you're hiring then. A lot of people are still confused about the FDE role. So they have questions like, is this just a role for bad engineers that supporting sales? Is this an underpaid way of getting people doing, full stack roles plus sales plus other stuff? Is this a role that's has to be on site? Do you live out of a hotel and like never see your family? So maybe you could kind of expand a little bit on the role and tell us what it's like to be an FD at an OpenAI and how that image compares, and maybe why somebody would want to be an FD at OpenAI.
Yes. There's a lot of negative examples, and so I'll try and make up great positive examples on this. Few things. One, I think for any engineer that likes and get excited about new problems and solving new challenges, I don't think there is any other role in the world where you get exposure to as many of these exciting challenges. The other one is when you think about building with AI, you want to be at the forefront, like you want to be seeing those challenges and you want to be fixing them. I think being an FD, offers you the ability to solve a lot of these challenges and get the learnings. I think if you think about how OpenAI is structured, the FDE team is very much the tip of the spear. Like we are kind of like the conduit between our research and our product organization and the customer voice, the challenges that they have. And so there is no better way to kind of like help shape the roadmap of a large company than by pointing at a very specific example of a problem that a customer has faced and we haven't been able to solve from our product primitives. And so I think of this as kind of like, the driving force for change in AI. I mentioned, this example of us creating the first kind of like multi-agent orchestration framework. We've also been working very closely with some of our customers like T-Mobile on improving, voice models so that it could be used within kind of like, their environment and kind of like supporting some of their customer service examples. So all of this is like, we're at the forefront. People work with customers. I think you have to sit down with customers. You have to be working with them, but you don't have to live out of the hotel room. I think a lot of our people have like families and are very happy with that. I think there's like there's a healthy lifestyle that you can get out of it. But I think, and we also pay people very well to answer your question, John. I think there's frankly an element of what gets you excited. And I think there's different roles for different types of engineers. Not everyone is made to be an FDE. And I think not all FDEs would love to be, product engineers or in some cases like infra engineers. I think if you are this kind of person that just gets excited and is very curious and have like high agency about going and solving these problems, I think people kind of like naturally find their way into the forward deployed engineering role.
Yeah, I agree with you. When I've done similar roles, it's been incredibly satisfying meeting customers, traveling to customers, seeing their problems in their environment and working with them. And the rate at which you can learn about different environments, different domains, their problems, and that the learning you can feed back to your organization is incredibly powerful. And certainly when I was young and single, I absolutely loved it. I got to travel the world doing some amazing things. When you get a family, that kind of being away from home and living at the hotel can become a bit less appealing. But I'm hoping to do a bit more of it as my kids grow up and I don't have to look after them as much. So we'll see how that pans out. So if somebody's interested, what's the process like? If they apply to OpenAI, what's your recruitment process like? I guess I have to ask the obvious question: how's that changed with AI?
It has, funnily. So we used to have a take-home project, for instance, which we now remove in favor of a kind of like in-person system design discussion. So when you think about the process, we will test for things that make you successful in this role. I like to think of the process as kind of like a real-world experience of what it takes to work at OpenAI. So what we'll do is there's a few different interviews and a few different chats. You'll meet with our recruiting team. You'll meet with one of our forward deployed engineers to kind of like discuss what the role is, and for us to understand where you are on your journey, what you are excited with. And then on the more kind of like skills test, we'll talk about like system design, what you've done, kind of like how you would approach building applications. We'll talk about past projects that you've done. And I love this interview because you can go very deep in understanding how people have approached problems. Part of our work is there's no perfect answer. And so I love when people bring, hey, I did that, it wasn't working. We tried to do it, wasn't working. We did this the other way, wasn't working. And then eventually kind of like find a half solve. And then we double down on that. Like this is the hard reality of solving some of the biggest and most complex problems out there. And so it takes multiple, strides to solve it. And then we'll go and kind of like, run you through a real world problem that we face with a customer to test how we could collaborate as FDEs on the project, because this is very much a job where you spend time sort of like working with people and collaborating with people. So at a high level, like this is how the process is run. People who go through it sort of like, I think the people who like the job tend to like the process. And so, it's a great test for you going through this to kind of like feel whether this is a place where you'd be excited to spend time.
Just as you were describing that process, I was thinking, I can see how much you enjoy that interview and how much that excites you. And it's exactly the same mindset for that interview as it's going to make you enjoy talking to a customer and finding out about the project and going through those iterations and challenging it. Cool. We have pretty much used up our time, Arnaud. So thank you very much for talking about that. If anyone's interested in reaching out and applying for a role as an FTE at OpenAI, is it best to go through their website?
Yes. we have a career website. We have a number of roles posted across the entire world right now. We also have like a vertical specific role for people that are interested in things like life sciences or financial services. So just find the one that you're most excited with. We have an amazing recruiting team that will reach out to you, and we'll be excited to be in touch.
Awesome. And is there anything that I should have asked you about that I haven't?
Well, John, I think it's been a pleasure discussing with you. What I'm frankly like most excited with as we were discussing this is seeing how much our world as engineers has changed over the past few years. And so when I think about Codex and I look at like how much people now use Codex, the speed at which this is growing, and myself as an engineer, how much it's changed, my own software development lifecycle. I'm frankly excited to see what people build with it. And so, I'd love for you to, go back a few weeks from now and tell me from your community, how people have reacted to this and how, they're using the tools and what they're generating with it. It will be, fascinating to understand this from the field directly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Jono. Been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you, John.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Coding Chats. If you did, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out these other videos on a similar topic.